All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of Drunk Agile. As you can see in the background, we have the star of the show, Nisha. She's actually more alert than she normally is. So,
oh, give it 5 minutes.
But okay, she'll be passed out. As always, we're Nisha's sidekicks. My name is Daniel Bacanti. With me is
Prateek Singh.
And as is customary, we'll start off by talking about what the heck we're drinking tonight. So, Prateek, you want to go?
Yeah, so as we mentioned the last couple of times, our supplies here are running low.
Yeah, slim pickings.
I'm having an old fashioned today with my with a relatively reliable bourbon. It's Long Branch. It's a Wild Turkey expression. It by itself is not very strong, so it goes beautifully in an old fashioned. So it brings out all the flavors of an old fashioned.
Perfect.
That's where we are today.
I'm slumming it again, drinking whiskey with an E as well, because, again, it really is just slim pickings around here. I went with something. Yeah, I went with something that Prateek had earlier, Legion. I was just reading. I didn't realize this is actually finished in a wine and sherry cask.
Yeah. I
didn't notice that before. So you might have said it, but, I don't listen to you. 47%. So, and I as well, because I can't drink anything that has an E in it straight. So I made an old fashioned as well. So cheers, everybody. This is the second on our journey of kind of getting back to the basics of Agile and Lean. Last time we started with, hey, what does it mean to even just define a workflow and even visualize a workflow? Some tips and tricks around the importance, of starting with that basic definition. But now this is the episode, I think, where the rubber hits the road, where we talk more about, all right, now that we've got that workflow defined, how do we actually leverage it? How do we actually operate it to optimize the delivery of value, whatever that value is? So I know both Prateek and I have, as you can imagine, we have very biased opinions on this. Do you want to start us off with some thoughts about?
Well, yeah, so probably the thing that people associate most with this, actively managing the workflow and getting things flowing, probably, especially when you hear the word Kanban, the thing people associate the most with are WIP limits.
Yep.
It's probably as good a place as any to start. And just spoiler alert, just setting WIP limits is not enough. But that's the place to. I think that's the place to start.
It's a necessary but not sufficient condition, and because we do call this Drunk Agile, but this has a very decided Kanban or flow bent to it. But I think a lot of people assume when we say WIP limits, the first thing that kind of is conjured up in their mind is a board with several columns, and every single column has a work in progress limit, and that's what they think Kanban is. And let's just debunk that myth right away. Let's talk about why that is just not important and potentially not even the best way to start at all. So do you have some thoughts about that? Of course I do.
I actually have pretty strong opinions about it. I even think that the per column WIP limit is probably an anti-pattern. There are much better ways to do that. But regardless of how you limit WIP in your system, regardless of how whether it's putting WIP limits on all columns, or it's putting WIP limits across the board, or going into a sprint planning meeting and saying over the next 2 weeks, we're going to focus on only these 5 items. Regardless of how you limit WIP, as long as you're limiting WIP, you're optimizing your workflow, you're managing your workflow. So that just putting numbers on top of a column is not the only way to limit WIP.
Yeah, and my biggest, having taught this for a long time now, my biggest problem with the numbers on, well, I've got so many problems, but one of my biggest problems with the numbers on the columns is, people want the super secret formula for what does it take to get that number exactly right. And that's one of the biggest problems is there is no formula to get that number. And people become more worried about the actual number than the mechanics of pull and flow themselves, what we're really after is flow to optimize value. The number in a lot of instances is largely irrelevant. I mean, it's not, but it is. but people just, they focus way too much. They put way too much emphasis on that. And when they don't get that number right, then they say, oh, well, Kanban doesn't work, right? It's just, it's just no good.
Yeah, we're usually dealing with such analytical folks, and
Yeah. And
thinking in ranges comes really hard to them. And there's not a real answer. There are probably multiple real answers depending on where you are.
Yeah. And getting people past the idea of that number has to be exactly perfect right off the bat to more of, all right, how do we make that number as low as possible, but not lower, so that we're prompting conversations just in time or at the right time. I mean, that's really what that number is there for, is to prompt.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because the folks who teach it, or all of us who practice it, we say inspect and adapt so many times about the products we're building, but we don't say it enough about the process we're developing.
Right.
So that exactly is it. You're inspecting, adapting. How many things should ever be in progress with you?
Yeah, and I would say probably inspect and adapt is more useful for process than product. But that's a whole other episode. That's we're going to need a double old passion for that one. So let's talk about, okay, so if column WIP limits aren't necessarily the answer and potentially the anti-pattern, what are some alternatives? When we just talk about, we're just talking about limiting WIP right now. This is only the first half of the conversation, by the way. What are some other options? What should people consider?
So there are multiple other things you consider. The thing that I feel like teams should go to first, and again, this is completely just my bias, I could be completely wrong about this, is to say, how many things are we comfortable having on our board total at any given time? Things that have started but not finished. What is that number? Let's find that correct number, or not correct, but as correct as possible. Let's find that number and let's start there. It covers everything. And what that helps with is to say that everyone is essentially responsible for everything, and it doesn't have that segregation of, oh, dev has 6. If dev has 5 and QA has 10, I don't have to worry about that. I can pull one in. The place I would rather teams start is this what's called a con WIP system of, our board cannot have more than 10 things on it at any given time.
And what's so funny about that is, as is so many things, we were talking about this before the show started, as is so many things in Kanban, that con WIP approach is kind of seen as the anti-pattern. A lot of times it's described as the anti-pattern, when you and I have both, have a lot of experience with that being, if not the best place to start, one of the best options out there to start with introducing Kanban, and then ratcheting it down from there. So don't get bought into this thing don't necessarily get bought into the thing that we have to have a work in progress limit on every column. Having one global one across the whole board, or several columns grouped together, whatever. However, remember, the point is that you're just controlling work in progress, right? That's what makes Kanban work. The fact that you're controlling work in progress, not exactly what the number is, or not that you've got it right. So the thing is, segueing into the second half of the conversation, one of the ways that potentially know that maybe that number is set right or not is based on the actual much more powerful technique. When we talk about actively managing your workflow, there's a much more powerful technique than just limiting work in progress. And what is that technique?
For me, and again, this is the most ignored technique across the board, which is actively managing the age of the items that are in progress. How long have things been active and not yet gotten done? What is the age of each item? And it is potentially, in my opinion, more important than even limiting WIP. I mean, I think they both go hand in hand, but you can imagine the condition where you limited everything to 10 items, but 2 of them have been active for 100 days. that means 80% of your items are doing okay. 20%, a fifth of your items are actually not doing okay. And that I think in itself is a huge thing. In fact, I actually believe if you're managing the age of items really well, you might not even need to limit WIP. But I haven't seen many proofs of that in the wild yet.
It's probably true, but that I think that's why you and I both both feel so strongly about managing age is because everything else from active management of flow perspective pretty much can be derived from looking at age. You know, even setting work in progress limits, your blocker policies, your policies in general, your visualization, everything. How you're setting your workflow. When do we start? When do we finish? All of that really can be derived from looking at that one metric. And so much is made of leading versus lagging indicators. I think honestly that debate is largely academic, like so many other things. But if there is such a thing as a leading indicator, if there is a way to get a signal as soon as possible that maybe something's going wrong, age is it, and age is all we got. As far as that. So if you're not looking at age, you need to look at age.
Yep.
But so what are some things that we can do? I mean, how do we know if things are, because age in and of itself is arbitrary, right? I mean, we have to have some benchmark that to which we're comparing, so that we know, well, is this too old, too young? I mean, so how do we use this age thing? What do we?
I mean, what better to use than your own data, right? What better to say, hey, usually we get things done, for example, in 10 days or less. But this thing has already been active for 9 days and it's nowhere close to getting done. So probably there's something wrong with this thing. We should take action on it. The way we talk about it usually is to say, let's look at all your past data and let's see how long does it take for whatever 70% of your items to get done, 85% of your items to get done, 95, whatever service level expectation you want to set, whatever you want to say to your customers. Hey, 80% of the time I get things done in 10 days or less, or 90% of the time I get things done in 15 days or less. Let's pick that, draw a line in the sand and say 85% of the time we get things done in 10 days or less, and we will manage our process to that, to figure out, are things getting too old? Are things really flowing the way they should? That let's use your data to figure out, is this one item conforming to your system or not?
Right. Yeah, so this is key. This is the key point, I think, of the whole podcast. So we should probably, or video or whatever the heck this thing is. I don't even know what this thing is. So I think we should spend a little bit of time doing just a little bit of a deep dive on this thing. When we talk about using our historical data and comparing the current age to historical data, couple things immediately spring to mind for me. So I'm just going to pick one and we'll talk about it, and hopefully we'll get to all of them. All right. So I have my past data. I have some reasonable assessment of risk. Mm-hmm. Like you said, okay, we really don't want our stuff to age past 80% of what our history has been, or whatever. I didn't quite say that right, but what do I do? Okay, so in your example, maybe I've got an item in this first column. My service level expectation is 10 days or less, but I've got an item in the first column that's at 9 days. Well, but stuff just takes as long as it takes, right? I mean, that's Kanban. Kanban says that, right? You can't force an item to take less time, right?
Wow.
I'm just teeing you up. Take a drink. Take a swig. Take a swig. Yeah.
Should I just switch to the bottle at this point? So the thing is that is the one thing that is so hard to argue against, because people don't have context on. Because as a developer, I can just go, hey, yeah, you know what, this kind of stuff just takes 30 days. It just does. There's nothing. But at the same time, things in the past have not. So we got that number, whatever, 10 days from the past, which probably means that with this particular item, something is going wrong. Either it absolutely is an exception. It absolutely is one of those things that just cannot. And if it is an exception, it's an exception. That's fine. 85% means that 1 out of 6 is going to be like that. Right. But beyond that, I think, but that shouldn't be our first assumption. That's probably it's a diagnosis of exclusion. That-
Because it's an exception, we should treat it exceptionally, right?
exactly,
We
yeah.
shouldn't assume going in that every case is the exception, right?
Exactly.
You keep saying that word. I don't think
Anything
it
mean.
means what you think it means.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then let's get down to, hey, is this a systemic problem? Is this thing held up because hey, there's only one person we have who has expertise in this, and that person, she gets pulled off for other things over and over again. If it's a systemic problem, let's solve the systemic problem. It's telling us that is what the issue is. Or is it a problem specific to this item? That, hey, usually our items have 3 acceptance criteria. This one has 30. Maybe it's something specific to this one, or maybe we haven't spent enough time figuring out what are the smallest pieces of this item we can actually get feedback on, actually get out there and start getting some feedback. So uh, I would eliminate system causes and individual item causes before saying this is the exception.
Right. And this is when if we ever get to our program on variability, I'm sure we will do a whole show on variability. This is one of the key things that you will need to understand about variability, because really what we're talking about here is variability. And that is when variability shows up in your process, and variability will show up. I mean, not every item that flows through your process is going to take the same amount of time, right? We're not going to be able to get everything done in exactly 10 days. We're not going to be able to always have the exact same throughput every day, right? There is just going to be natural variability. It's intrinsic to what we do. Variability is just intrinsic. So once you can embrace that, once you accept that and you can embrace that, then the next thing you need to accept and the next thing you need to embrace is when variability rears its ugly head, the vast majority of the time, it's down to stuff that you're doing, right? It's not just down to random stuff that's just bad things. It's not just bad luck, right? It's not just bad things that are happening. The vast majority of the time, and depending on who you talk to, if you go back to Stewart, he would say, 99% of the time, it's stuff you're doing, and it's not stuff, and it's not this exceptional stuff. And so that's why I think you're making the point about, we need to look at these other causes, things that we're doing. We haven't broken up the item properly. We're not swarming. Maybe the acceptance criteria is unclear. Whatever. There's all kinds of dozens and dozens of things that might be going wrong, stuff that we're doing that is causing this thing not to flow. And that's where you need to look first, rather than, that's just is what it is. And lay over and play dead, just like Nisha is doing there, right? That's how most development teams look, right?
5 minutes. Who had 5 minutes?
That's what they look like when stuff's taking too long.
Well, it's my favorite example for this is driving to work, right? You're not gonna have the exact minutes and seconds down. You just won't. It'll vary a little bit because there are traffic lights, there are things that happen. But every once in a while, there'll be an accident on the highway. So that is external. But the fact that you leave when rush hour starts is under your control. If you leave during rush hour, you're causing the variability, not anything else. Leaving half an hour earlier, you'll have a system that's a lot less variable.
Prateek, just for those of you who don't know, so we're both in South Florida. We're from we live in South Florida right now, and it's South Florida rules on the roads down here, and Prateek takes control, right? I mean, it's like one thing of variability he controls. Doesn't matter if the speed limit's 35. He's doing 90 in that thing.
He can take care of it.
Yeah, it's like, right? We can fix this.
So, if we're going that fast, we're not cutting anyone off.
I got. It's like, I'm taking control of this. Yeah. So this is why the two magic ingredients to the secret sauce, if you will, of this active management of work in progress, the one that gets all the attention, all the glory, which is limiting work in progress. And like we said, that's necessary, but not sufficient. These, I would argue, the more necessary and potentially sufficient is paying attention to aging. If you want to get to a flow-based system, the single, I think, biggest thing that you can do, change that you can make, is start tracking, the metric of item age, and start managing to that. Bring it up if you're doing daily meetings, either a stand-up or daily scrum, whatever. start introducing it into your daily scrum, however you can introduce this metric. To me, that is by far and away, by far, the biggest bang for the buck. If you haven't mastered, quote unquote, mastered the art of aging, then I don't know what you're doing messing around with any of this other stuff, really, to be honest.
And just to supplement that, it doesn't matter if you're doing Kanban, you're doing Scrum, you're doing XP. A work item age doesn't care about which process you follow. Even if you're doing waterfall, work item age doesn't care. If you're able to manage age, I'll attribute it to you, but I don't know who you got it from. It's not that you become predictable, it's you do predictability. Watching work item age and taking action on it is doing predictability on a daily basis.
Yep. Just quick shout out to my friend Bennett Vallett. Bennett was the guy who coined that. He's big on predictability is a verb, right? He's very, very, very big on that. So I got that from him. So quick shout out. If you don't know Bennett, you should really go look up his stuff. All right. So we've talked about the big things, limiting work in progress, paying attention to aging, the biggest stuff. We should probably talk about it, just kind of a few other things that are going to come up. Things like managing blockers, defining policies, things that I don't know. Just in the interest of more completeness, we should probably say a few things about that.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because I'll throw this back to you, because frankly, what happens when a team starts watching aging is they quickly realize that, okay, yeah, sure, some things are under our control, we can take care of this, but there are often things that happen that are outside of our control. I could get this done if Microsoft just fixed that bug in their system. And so I have to throw it back to Microsoft, and because we are a .NET shop, we can't get past this. What do I do? So at that point, that item is aging while it's in our system, but I can't do anything about it. We as a team cannot do it. What do we do, Dan?
Cry. Usually, I usually curl up in a ball just like Nisha.
The Microsoft. So I just
fetal position and cry. I mean, there's without going too deep into the all the stuff we talk about in our class. You've got several options. And number one, first and foremost, we definitely want to quantify the effect of that dependency, of that blockage or whatever. So if you're not actively flagging things in real time as blocked and tracking the amount of time that they're blocked, then anything else that we say doesn't really matter. So the first thing that we need to do is actually try and quantify that, so that we can then hopefully adjust our policies based on this thing. Because if over the course of us doing work, and we know if this item gets blocked by Microsoft bug, it's probably 6 months before the thing is ever really going to get fixed. Mm-hmm. Now we can start making a more proactive decision around, well, is this really the right thing to be working on right now? If Microsoft's not going to get back to us for 6 months, and we really can't make progress on this item for 6 months, do we really want to keep it in progress for that time? Do we want to maybe move it to the backlog or move it to done as canceled, or move it to the backlog to pull it in later, right? All of those things. Or is it one of these things that, well, we're waiting on customer sign off. Customer says they're going to get back to us in a couple of days. We can't release it into production until we have that customer sign off. Is it okay for us to just leave it in progress for a couple of days until we get that customer sign off? And again, we know that if any item comes along where we need this customer sign off, we're probably going to have to add 2 or 3 days of cycle time to that service level expectation that you're talking about. So I would say first and foremost, you absolutely have to quantify these blockers when they happen, so that we can make much more data-informed decisions about what's the right decision, right action to take. I don't know. Do you have something to add to that?
No, I didn't. I think that's perfect. But just trigger alert. What if this isn't an external dependency, but we're working on this thing, and then something more important showed up, and we absolutely have to jump on this, and at that point, if we have to put this on hold, what do we do in that case?
Yeah. Don't is the short answer. I don't know if that should be part of the variability conversation either, but this is one thing I have to give, a lot of credit to our boss, the guy that we work with at Ultimate Software, Steve Reed, is, some policies that he put in place when these urgent items show up, because they are going to show up, right? I mean, there's stuff that's going to come along that is going to demand our immediate attention. But the real question is, how immediate does that attention need to be? And if we're running a predictable system, if we're like Prateek was talking about earlier, if we're running a fairly predictable system where we know things are finished, roughly things are finishing every day, and hopefully multiple things are finishing every day, and this urgent item shows up, the immediate question becomes, well, we know something's going to finish today. Can we give it a couple hours and wait till something finishes before we pull this urgent item in, rather than just arbitrarily blocking something and pulling it in? A much, and you wouldn't think, just that simple decision, you wouldn't think that has a big impact, but it has a huge impact on predictability. Can we at least just wait a couple hours until this thing finishes? Probably most of the urgent work would fall into that category of, we can't hold off for an hour or two until something else finishes to pull that in. Sorry, go ahead.
Very good. No, please finish.
I was just gonna say the rare, and they are rare. They should be literally 0.1% of the time, probably, of the items where you should be dropping everything to work on. Well, in that case, yes, you drop everything to work and you block it. But again, we're quantifying it, and then your flow is just going to be screwed up for a while that thing's being worked on. So, I know what were you going to say? Sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly that attitude of, when someone yells, we just pick it up, is the exact opposite of the stop, starting, start, finishing stuff. In the earlier, and this just happens to be my favorite example again. In the earlier traffic example, you don't want just random people to cut in front of you. You don't.
The on-ramp to Royal Palm, right? This is what you're talking about right now.
If you're on by the way, yeah, again, South Florida reference, but I'm sure everyone has this. You have an off-ramp from a highway, and there's a light on it. People just try to cut in front of you if there are a lot of people lined up. And you should not allow that to happen, because it only delays how long it takes for everyone else to get on. But if it's an ambulance, you have to let it through, but you have to set the bar that high. Yeah. It has to be an ambulance.
It has to be life or death. It has to be life
exactly.
or death.
99.9% of the time, people cutting in front of you, it's not an ambulance. Yeah. But when it is, it makes sense. Allow for it.
But see, for those of you who know Prateek, he doesn't get very angry very often. At least he doesn't show that he gets angry very often. But you're sitting in a car with him when somebody in front of him is letting someone in, and he's got an interesting perspective, because a lot of people get mad at the actual person who's doing the cutting in, but that's not the right place to place your anger, to direct your anger. It's the people who let that happen.
Exactly. That person is doing what's best for them. They are going, this is what makes me the most efficient. It's everyone else. I don't understand. I don't understand. How are you making your own life less efficient and being happy about it? I don't get it.
This is why we talk about traffic on the show, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see Prateek get worked up about something. He won't get worked up about anything else. Next time when the Cricket World Cup is on,
no, we can't do. Well,
we'll talk about
by
that.
By the way,
too.
They pushed the T20 World Cup already.
Time to break out the black armbands. I don't know. We're in national mourning, 6 months of mourning now or something. So anything else, just to kind of tie a bow around the active management of work in progress. So we talked about work in progress. We talked about aging. We've talked about just general policies. Mm-hmm. I mean, anything else you want to say to wrap things up for active?
No, again, I would just go back to to Bennett's words of, you don't expect your system to be predictable if you don't do predictability on a daily basis. If you this active management of work, this thing that we do on a daily basis, is the bedrock of predictability. If you do this stuff on a daily basis, the rest of it just takes care of itself.
Maybe you guys have heard of the product that I developed, the metrics product I developed, but it's called ActionableAgile, and there's a reason. There is a reason. I mean, of all the names that I could have chosen, There is a very definite reason that I called it actionable agile, because it really is about taking action, taking control of your own destiny in order to drive better predictability and better outcomes in your process. So I always like to say that I'll give you the last word. I'll give you the last word, but then I'll say something else. So I don't know. Is
Yeah.
there anything else?
Well, that's it. Yeah, just do predictability in order to be predictable, and the way you do predictability is actively managing the items that are in front of you.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm actually, my drink is out. That's the problem with, I think, drinking old fashions is
Yeah.
they go down a little bit too easy. So that's it for tonight's episode or today's episode or whatever it is. For Nisha in the background there, of course, and my friend and colleague Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you very much for joining this latest edition of Drunk Agile, and we will see you in the next episode. Have a good night.